I will introduce you to Phil Evans, Senior Manager at the IB, to get this event started.
Thanks very much, Zach, and thank you all for joining us. We hope that you are well and keeping safe during these troubling times. But we're pleased, as Zach said, to have had three various topics that we have shared on the strategies for broadening participation. And today I'd like to introduce one of my esteemed colleagues, Kelsey Day.
Everyone, thank you all for joining. I am an IB World Schools Manager, and I work with states in the United States on the Western side, and I'm really looking forward to this presentation today.
Thanks, Kelsey. So we're focusing today on advancing equity and access in IB programs, and this is something that the IB has been active in, and particularly the IB community. Many schools have been really striving to bridge the achievement gap and offer a world-class education to all the students that they serve in their school. So we're hoping to share some of those stories today and some of those strategies and assist you. My name is Phil. If you haven't joined any of the webinars previously, I come from a new department in the IB called the Strategic Initiatives, Innovation and Incubation team. And this model here represents the way that we approach some fact-finding and some discovery by talking to various stakeholders within our organization, many of our colleagues in learning and teaching, assessment, IB World Schools, development, and in professional services. And we also work with groups of schools, associations, and individual schools to learn about the struggles, challenges, whatever it is that schools are facing, and there's a wide range of things. So then we look at whether or not we've already got some great services we can point to, or whether or not the IB needs to develop something new. If those things become viable and popular, then we find ways that we can turn them into something that is part of the daily, or business as usual, I guess we would call it. So yeah, this is a new initiative, and we're hoping that we'll be able to support you a lot better across all the departments. So as typical in each of these presentations, we've been looking at some of the opportunities and the strengths that we have to lean on, that we can leverage, and looking at some of the challenges or barriers to student participation. These can be deterrents, and sometimes they're systematic, sometimes they're cultural in terms of school culture, and sometimes it's just, sometimes the students' self-efficacy, and we need to find new ways to communicate the value of the IB and to create systems of support. So some of the research that we have to share today, and we've got so much wonderful research that you can use and share, but I think it's great to sit down and study some of the findings for how the IB has been implemented in settings serving students that are usually underserved or don't have access to rigorous coursework. That can be a really great place to start to educate your teaching community and find talking points to share with parents and even decision makers. Alumni stories are always a huge part. Many of the schools that we talk to say that it's the graduates that come back and talk about their experience that inspire their peers to take on the challenge. We have great featured alumni stories on the IB website. And in each of these, we have shared some of those stories. In the toolkits that will be available, after all of the series is complete, you'll have customizable versions of those so that you can, add your own students to those toolkits, to those featured alumni, and share those with your students if you'd like to use the format that we have. I think education the IB education is designed to be student-centered. Obviously, every program model has the learner profile right in the middle and in the center. And a critical part just outside of that is the approaches to learning and the approaches to teaching. And, these are some very, very, tangible pieces, some practices that we can invest in and get creative about the way that we implement that school-wide in a way that we could, bridge access. And similarly, you can see that, the barriers make a lot of sense. We are, IB is an incredible opportunity. It is an excellent education, and because I think the IB started out only 50 years ago, and is a relatively small organization. Sometimes that can be misinterpreted as elite. And when students look at students that, their peers that are excelling academically and compare themselves, sometimes they think that they may not fit that kind of profile. So we can work on that. We also need to then, talk about different types of success. Sometimes we highlight the incredible accolades of students that are, being accepted into selective universities, and students that are, ready for a challenge and would like to be challenged, but may not feel that they're going to be able to keep up in the program unless they have those clear messages as well. So, using those terms correctly, thinking about how we explain rigor and challenge to students, and create those systems of support to help them. So you may have heard the term IB for all, and it's not just an equity and access term. I think that the message is that the IB is a great approach to learning, and an excellent way for teachers to practice in education. So, there are students that are also, not within the category of low income or underserved that don't choose the IB. So we just want to help as many students as possible to understand that we're offering the kind of education to them that will open up opportunities. So, access, broader definitions of access in the school. We're looking at the way that students are engaged in their own growth, the way that students are exposed to a range of perspectives and ways of solving problems, and that, in essence, all students possessing the skills that we need to see in the future, the uncertain future, the rapidly changing world that we're in. Every student should have access to that kind of development. Students need to see their potential and feel confident that they can learn these new things and develop the new skills. It's the centric learning that we talked about before, the philosophy, the themes, the concepts that make it, learning experiences universal. The flexible choice option is an element that very, I think we're not articulating that clearly enough to students, that there are lots of different ways that they can bring their own interests to an IB experience. Kelsey, you have quite often worked with schools that are really doing well to open up options. What are some of the things that schools are doing to, I guess, leverage that flexibility and choice?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mindset shifts that's helpful is instead of saying how many more students can we get to participate in these classes, instead thinking about the pedagogical approaches and aspects that you just want for as many students as possible, and having that mindset shift to, okay, we actually do want all students to be owning their own education, and we want all students to, you look at the approaches to teaching and learning, and that's just 52 years of global best practices, and how can you go wrong with that? And so just shifting that from, looking at numbers of students participating, and rather than that, just shifting to a commitment to these aspects as just good teaching and learning overall for all students. And so selling it that way to not only students, but parents as well, not selling it, but convincing them that these are the practices in education that we believe in to be the best for all students. And that's a very different way of approaching, expressing what we think the IB will do for kids than what we often hear at schools.
Here's some example of the kind of research that we love to share and promote. The research, particularly on the left there from the University of Chicago Consortium, was conducted in 2012, I believe, and we've just created this new snapshot, with some really great graphics, but I really recommend taking a look at the full paper, and there'll be a link to that in the digital toolkit as well, to look at what the students said about their experience and their sense of community, their sense of organization skills, their preparedness, the sense of you know, I guess, initiative that they felt that they could take in their education, and not just keeping up with peers, but feeling that they could accelerate and exceed some of the peers, and particularly in the areas of writing. You know, IB, whether or not students come to the program as strong writers, the experience definitely does build those skills and get them on track to be able to continue to grow as writers. The study on the right is a national study that pulled data from the National Student Clearinghouse and compared that to the data that we have for students that are entering into university right after high school. And there's some really pleasing results, which I'll share with you in a moment. As mentioned, these are the graphics here for the Chicago Public Schools study, looking at how deeply students internalized their sense of achievement. You know, I think that self-efficacy is really what we hope for every student to finish high school with. The Title I study here shows us that in the green here, the pale green, that students that are in a traditional education that come from low income households, 46% likely to enroll in university. And some of that is that we know that students don't often apply in this particular demographic, don't apply for very many options, and don't always have the same sort of support to be able to even afford the application. So going through that university application process isn't always very well supported, whereas we do find that, you know, students in IB schools, and this was also, you know, something that the students comment on quite regularly, that there's a lot of support for how to approach their applications for college and getting ready. But the opposite side to the green and the pale blue is the same group of students, but in an IB education. And I think it's amazing to see that they are keeping up with the students that are in the you know, broader cohort of the IB, and eclipsing or passing the national cohort of students, many of which are also engaged in other advanced coursework. So this is a great study to share with teachers when looking at you know, the universal benefits of being an IB student. That's why I've put up there in the corner, any student can benefit, because we know that we have a wide range of different types of IB schools. Not every school in the world is serving students that come from economic hardship. So, you know, in that sense, one framework in multiple languages around the world tailored to those national contexts and sometimes even religious contexts. You know, we're able to provide, you know, excellent approaches, as Kelsey pointed out. We have studies coming out all the time. There's a new employability skills study, but I've chosen to share this with you today. Again, another low-income students, you know, findings of low-income student in IB diploma program. And I like these two statements here because I think they help us to understand what it takes to you know, have success in an IB setting. And these 2 points, you know, first of all, how well do the students understand their potential, the support that they're going to have in the program, the value that we have in our school culture around growth mindset? Do they feel like they can be part of the program? Do they know? And it appears in this study that students knew very well that they could, you know, become really well prepared for college. And the second part is that the schools that are excelling have got lots of systems of support for the students to be able to cope with the rigor and to be able to get the help that they need. And we have some great case studies that articulate the details and the range of different types of supports that they have. I thought I'd put this up as a little bit of a sign, but I'm just thinking about the claims that we make about the IB, and some of them that we've articulated already. But this promotion that the IB, yes, it's rigorous, but it is also not just about going to college. It's about a much bigger picture. It's about being able to leverage the learning from university and higher education, or to be equipped with a really strong foundation to be able to go straight into the workforce or to become an entrepreneur. Many young people today are online and using Instagram to get involved in their own businesses and become influencers. And there's some, the world is changing. So the way that education looks needs to change, and so does the message. So this idea of opening opportunities, shaping the future, inviting them to become a lifelong learner and helping them to understand why that's so important. And in doing so, there's lots that they can discover about themselves. And I thought, in the toolkit, you might like to use a slide like this and appropriate it for your own messaging. But the short mission statement of the IB is education for a better world, as you're probably familiar if you're part of the IB community. And I just think, it makes common sense that the world is better if every learner has access to high quality education. And so that's why we wanted to run this session today with this theme on improving access to the IB programs. So if you need some help with some of the messaging, we do have some resources that are in development. This document, there's a couple of pages I've pulled out just as a visual, but this full document is something I put together when working with a school that was really interested in redeveloping their marketing and their messaging. It's available as a link in the IB program communities. We'll highlight those in a moment. It'll be a part of this toolkit as well. But we do have lots of support for messaging. These are the two new program communities that I hope that you might join, that have a lot of themes and areas for discussion to break down some of these strategies so that you can pick and choose and get involved and share your resources with each other. But Kelsey, can you tell us a little bit about the Excellence and Equity group, which has been going for quite a while now?
Sure. So this group is for, very similar to the other ones, any school who is wanting to increase the participation in their schools in the DPCP. We have a moderator who's done this in U.S. public schools, and this is a place for you to share ideas, to ask questions, to post a specific issue, and then ask others what have they done in that position. I know a lot of school leaders that I talk to feel very much out there on their own in their own city, and they feel very far away from the answers. And so the purpose of this program community and all the program communities is really to connect leaders throughout the world who are going through many of the same challenges. And so we're hoping to see more people join, more people post, more people give each other ideas and inspiration. This was actually one of the documents that we created as a result of the Excellence and Equity initiative, which was done in 2018. The initiative was a spin-off, kind of a way for us to reach more schools, and based on the work done in the Bridging the Equity Gap project, where they designed some workshops and this framework in particular to help schools increase participation in their programs. And so it goes by dimension, and it will talk about things you can do with your counselors, things you can do with parents, things you can do about your philosophy and culture, things you can do for learning and teaching. And it goes through each of these things from all of those perspectives. So this framework is one of the tools that the IB has created and has shared widely, that is now updated to reflect the new standards and practices. Some important things that we have learned from this initiative that I hope everyone will be able to learn from is that it really does take a lot of leadership. leadership at all levels to move things forward in an inclusive way. It also is very incremental. And schools need to know and understand that it's kind of a long run sort of process. It's not a one and done sort of year goal. Okay, well, we opened access and now we're good to go. It really is all the layers, all the levels of things that I just talked about that have to take place over time. One of the schools we interviewed had 4 5-year plans. And so this was a course of 20 years. He was working to increase access, increase supports, help teachers understand best ways to support students in different areas of the curriculum, and different classes and different courses, which courses are best, which courses provide more opportunities, all of those questions that go into this. But you have to look at it from all the different angles. And this framework is just that. You can take each of the little pieces and put it in a place that works for your school. The conversations have to happen within your community, because every school community is so different within our country, even within the states, even within the cities, right? You have very different school communities. And so these conversations and the process in which you open your programs looks very different. So it's connecting, it's talking, it's thinking through your wraparound services. What are the community resources that you have available that you can then use in your programs and with your staff? So it's so very different, but the framework allows you to think through all of those pieces. And then we've got a lot of planning tools around how you can strategically place these into your next 5 years.
Kelsey, what do you think about schools that might be interested in creating a plan that may be 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and how does that work with the way that we go through the evaluation cycle and the self-study cycle with the new standards and practices and resources there?
So I love the idea behind IB, right? Is very much this inquiry, action, reflection. So it's starting with a question and it's piecing it into smaller chunks, because we know that the IB is very comprehensive, which means it's layered, which means it takes time to tackle it all, and that's okay. When you want to do it when you want to do it well, you have to take the time to do each piece very well. And so with schools going through evaluation, we work with them in a variety of ways. One is looking at the strategic plan of the school at the highest level. What are the main goals of the school? And then from there, you look at the program development cycle template, which is in the Program Resource Center. And it can help you develop one specific aspect in a very deep way, in a way that is sustainable, and in a way that is done by everyone and not just, checking a box. But then we also have schools create action plans for the next 5 years, where that is more of the surface level. This is our trajectory. This is the things we know we would like to do. But the program development cycle template allows you really to dive deep into one piece. And you can use all of these frameworks together to help create that roadmap for your school, and maybe a roadmap for increasing access and increasing supports at the same time.
Awesome. During the E2, there were a lot of resources that were developed, and some of them were a series of webinars that were recorded, and there were a whole bunch of resources that went with that. And we still have those available now on ibo.org. If you go to either the diploma program or the career-related program page, that main landing page, and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a section that says resources for schools, and when you go into there, you can find a section on growing participation, and these webinars can be found there. There's 3 topics.
There's also a great document called the IB Guide to Inclusive Education, and it's one of the best documents as well. It also has a self-reflection tool where you go through each of these small pieces of what it looks like to have an inclusive program.
Many schools in the E2 started to experiment with, expanding coursework too, right, Kelsey? And there were some resources that schools could use. The framework is talking about learning and teaching and professional development. How did that go? and amongst the schools that you know of?
I think this course in particular came up because it, in terms of scores across the board, this was one where students were feeling rather successful and teachers felt rather successful overall. And so it was one that made sense. Also, we know that every student most likely takes some sort of language and literature class in high school, at least in the US. And so this was kind of a jumping off point for allowing students. So instead of offering junior level English, you offer language and literature for all of your students. And really, again, this goes back to not necessarily saying, well, we have 300 kids in our IB course, but instead we're committed to the approaches to teaching and learning. We're committed to the approach to educating students in this way. But this is just one entry point into access. I've also heard of schools who offer CAS for all now that we don't have the registration fee. So instead of doing a senior community project, every student engages in CAS. You can now register a student for $10, I think is the cost, and have all of your students engaging in community service in that way. Another way is offering theory of knowledge as an elective to all students, or combining it with another course on campus such as AVID, which is a popular one in the United States. But those are a variety of ways. I've also heard of global politics as being one that many students are taking, and then history. But really, you're just broadening access to any part of the IB is really broadening access. It doesn't have to be necessarily the full diploma program, although that's always a good option as well. But all these pieces, and even expanding your training for teachers, not just your 11th and 12th grade teachers to the approaches to teaching and learning training, but also your 9th and 10th grade teachers. So you're creating the same language, you're creating a common approach to education. This was one way that we had schools do this, and I think it's going well in some cases, and so just expanding from there.
So from that, we're actually trying to develop more resources, and we brought together a small consortium of schools that had been implementing. Some had been implementing, and some had been in the planning phase, and some are very interested as well. So bringing these schools together, we looked at some of the questions and some of the lessons learned, and some of these points are actually some of the approaches that schools use. Just thinking around particularly approaches to learning and approaches to teaching as a core element, and how those elements could be extended right across the whole school. But orienting teachers in a step-by-step, managing that change really carefully to ensure that students, teachers have the support that they need to be able to understand what is going to be required of them, and to take ownership of that change too. We all know that it is much harder to manage change when it comes from the top down. So leadership is important, but that kind of leadership that really supports every teacher to be able to serve students well.
One last thing, Phil, is just I think it's important to recognize that incremental change is okay. Coordinators and principals I work with are very passionate and often want to see change right away. But it's a good reminder to know that incremental change is often more sustainable and a little bit better received on the part of others, so in some ways.
For sure. So people can look forward to, if you're interested in using this strategy, some resources to help to expand language and literature across the schools, based on the findings, based on the resources that schools that were part of that focus forum have been using. There'll be case studies, various models, various alumni stories, student testimonies of how they just being involved in one IB course has made a difference for them. And we don't do a lot of that. I think we quite often feature the full diploma. So it'd be nice to hear some of the students that have had just one course, and those toolkits and for how we communicate this with parents will also be available as well. More program resource previews, which will help find some, bring those resources that are, in various places in the PRC together, so that you can use those as a whole. So building that capacity for school-wide ATL skills implementation, very much like, you know, thinking of CAS across the school, using the learner profile across the school, or, you know, I was in a school that had it was a dual language school, and we had students at a whole range of different proficiency levels in their English. And you know, just no matter where students were, whether they were full diploma or whether they were taking a couple of courses, we had every student take TOK. And we, you know, supported that because we thought it was a really important course, really, you know, an opportunity that a lot of students don't get, you know, if they're not in an IB school. So there are, you know, so many ways to do this. I've, you know, in some of the schools that I've talked to, you know, it's common for us to choose an ATL skill category or a cluster that we're going to focus on for a unit or for a time. But one thing that I really enjoyed learning about was a school that not only had an overarching unit focus, but they would, at the beginning of the unit, talk through with the students to, you know, in some goal setting strategies, what sorts of skills do you think you're going to need to develop now that we're looking at what kind of productive task or end of assessment unit task we're going to be building. What sorts of skills do you think you, and some students would say, well, I'm just going to stick with plan A, you know, the full, what we're going to do as a class. And others would say, well, I think that alongside that, I want to, you know, work with you know, an adjacent skill. And it just helped the students to, you know, think and reflect on how they were, you know, using this time to become an active learner and to develop those learning strategies. I know the writing's small, but these are what they look like. There are two program resource, and I'm calling them PRC previews, mainly because there are lots, you know, it is sometimes hard to find the time to dig around in the communities, sorry, in the Program Resource Center. But there is an actual focus group on the approaches to learning skills development in the IB communities. And I've posted these resources there. They'll be attached to the digital toolkit as well. But this is just an example of how you can, you know, use videos, use the guide to inclusive education, various aspects throughout the many documents that we have, the many resources, and put them to use in your professional development. We've got some recommendations here for professional development from the IB, you know, formal professional development catalog. These three, you know, as Kelsey mentioned, it's really, you know, can have a huge impact to train teachers. Even if you're not implementing the MYP, you might want to look at the approaches to learning framework right across the board and to, you know, orient them that way. So the category 3 building self-directed learners is actually from the middle years program. But it also fits really well for any of the teachers that are you know, in your school, no matter what grade level. And then there are some specific ones for DP and CP. But this is a brilliant new model that PD has come up with, our professional services and professional services delivery. I keep messing up the title of that department. But you can train your teachers in your school. There's, you know, an opportunity here from 25 to 50 teachers for $3,000 USD. So that's pretty amazing, and you can choose any of the professional developments that you'd like to have on offer. That's the online virtual pricing there. So let's talk a little bit about some systems of support. Most of these are, you know, I mean, schools are developing these in relationship to the sorts of things that students need. But I think one thing I want to point out is just how important it is to think about students that can't stay after school. You know, not everybody is able to, you know, particularly students that have to go off and work are not able to always make use of the systems that might be quite accessible for the majority of students. But for the students that might be feeling like this is that the program's too rigorous, what are some of the resources that you can and systems of support that you can put together, the wraparound services. There's lots of examples of those in some of the case studies that we have for you to read, and we want to draw attention to some of those and post those links for you to be able to download those. What are some of the wraparound services you've seen, Kelsey, that are really impactful?
Definitely like peer tutoring, peer support systems, and parent volunteers from the community. Definitely very robust counseling system where the counselors are all trained in IB and understand how to talk about the IB in an inclusive way and how to encourage students to participate. Also, any time built into helping students learn how to prioritize and learn how to handle stressful situations or plan their days. Those types of things I've seen be very helpful.
And some people have like a 0 period in the morning too, where there's an opportunity for students to get help. And in some of the schools I've spoken to, there's partnerships with local universities where you know, there are volunteers, whether they're students or teachers or even students that are in the teaching and education program, that volunteer to support, tutor, and help with some of those things, even like organization skills and prioritizing. So there's lots of ways to support students that way, and we have a whole range of case studies that actually came from the Excellence and Equity initiative. These were 5 schools that participated. Is there anything that you want to point out? I've got you know, a page on each of them, but is there anything you want to say about these schools?
Just that I think from reading them, you'll realize how different every situation is. And part of what we did in this initiative was create resources for all schools. But upon doing that, we realized very quickly that every school needs such different things. And so the ability of all these school leaders to know their school community, understand all of the different aspects and intricacies of the community, and then help their teachers and staff prioritize and keep the focus over the long term. That became very clear to me when we did these interviews. There's also webinars that they did where we interviewed them and they showed a presentation that go into more detail as well.
And that's actually on that landing page that we'll provide where all of these case studies can be found. And one of them is Southside High School, which is in New York State. I think the interesting element here was the English language and literature focus that was a starting point, just requiring every student to take that course. It was the only course they decided to offer. They decided to offer higher level, but there are schools now that are offering both higher and standard level as an option. That standard level option is great because you can have a little bit more time with 1 or 2 less requirements than higher level to really get into the rigor and to help that skill development for students. If you're offering the career-related program alongside the diploma program, that's great too, because students don't necessarily have to take higher level courses if they do the CP. But you know, some of the findings you can read for yourself, but that idea that feedback that students were able to just really excel in college and feel prepared, and there were no cases of students reporting that they felt underprepared or for university. And this practice of listening to the needs of the students and validating those voices helps them to take ownership of their learning a whole lot more. You know, these are just very few examples of some great insights that you can gain from Southside High School. And up in Massachusetts, we have Sturgis Charter Public High School. This is a high school that has all students are involved in the IB. They are all participating in the 11th and the 12th grade the last two years. And they articulate the the personal impact that that has on students, not just the academic, the social and emotional and the financial support built into the way that they approach their implementation. And you know, they talk about how it's revolutionized their school, it's transformed the way that they you know, the way that they communicate with parents, the way that they you know, communicate with universities as well, and advocate for students, because they've got, you know, a really rich program for everybody. Fridley High School actually is in a wall-to-wall IB World School district. Every school in Fridley Public Schools in Minnesota is an IB school from primary years through. And Fridley actually has the middle years program in 9 and 10, the diploma program, and the career-related program. But they've worked really, really hard on implementing the sorts of strategies for bridging reading gaps in students that have a wide range of you know, proficiency in that realm. And they're one of the schools, Kelsey, that actually really focused on subjects other than language and literature as well, like global politics and environmental sciences, as great ways to engage students in their interests as well. And they felt that it was their duty. It felt like they really look at this from a social justice standpoint.
One thing I was just going to add is I think it's very natural to look at many of these schools and say, well, they are a charter, or they're private, or they have more resources than we do, or they clearly have a lot of district support that we may not have. And I think the question really is not what do they have that we don't, but what do we have in our current system that we can leverage? And the creativity is there, absolutely.
We also have Lamar High School in Texas, which is actually one of the largest IB schools in the world. It has offers, you know, IB has the most courses registrations, you know, and many students involved. And I think the interesting thing about this school is that it was an IB school for a very long time before they decided to start, you know, changing the way that they approach their policy. And I know, Kelsey, we've talked a lot about, you know, some of these policies that we may not necessarily perceive as barriers. But one of the ways that they flipped it was like, rather than, you know, opt into the IB, it was like, tell us why you think you shouldn't be in the IB. And I think that's a really interesting approach. Another school from California that I talk to quite regularly also says it's actually harder for students, or there's more involved for students to request to leave a course or to be you know, excluded from an IB course. They have to go around and get a recommendation or statements from various teachers, an assistant principal, a counselor, and, you know, but coming into the program is open. And so I think that also sends a really strong message across the community. Finally, but certainly not least, Rainier Beach High School in Washington State has actually been featured on PBS for the huge turnaround that the IB brought to their community. And it was driven by parents in the community that wanted to ensure that their school would remain open and to find the kind of program that would embrace their multicultural identity. This is a school that not only implements language and literature for all, but does so by offering students the opportunity, if their home languages are not English, to take the language and literature course as a student self-taught version, and they have a teacher that's trained in language and literature who oversees and guides the students through the various requirements in a classroom setting. But there are students in that same room studying that course in their home language. So that really gives the students even more opportunity for success. You know, we know there's a lot of research that shows that if you are able to develop in your home and target your home or native tongue, that can also help you to increase your ability in learning English if you're in an English majority environment. So this school has turned around the graduation rate, and they've gone from requiring students to take at least one course to this fall, which is their 10th year actually as an IB World School. Every student in the school will be taking 4 courses and the IB core, and they've got many students now, more and more students, involved in the full diploma. So there's some really amazing schools to inspire, and as you said, Kelsey, also different. Finally, we just want to point out that we've got some great resources. Both Kelsey and I have been supporting a project with the professional services team, and Colin Pierce, who has been involved in the IB for a long time and was the first coordinator at Rainier Beach High School. He's been involved in developing content for this really wonderful PD that has some really critical and practical things that you'll be able to learn. We're hoping that is going to be released in the near future. We're in the final stages of reviewing content at this time, but there's hopefully more to come as well as we continue to progress in supporting schools. But please look out for this one. We have a landing page on ibo.org. I mentioned it earlier. If you go to the program page, scroll to the bottom and look for resources for schools. This is where you'll find a specific area with research collected, case studies, and all the webinars that we've talked about, the resources there too. So this is the final in the 3rd series. These are all resource webinars that have recordings. They have the presentations you can download, and these little digital toolkits that you can customize for yourself and depending on your school context. Please look out for our upcoming webinar on the career-related program. Those of you that may be following the webinars closely would have seen is the IBDP for Me, which was in partnership with Del Mar High School from California. Very, very well attended webinar, and similarly with the CP, we're going to be featuring some of the career-related studies and looking at why the CP is such a great opportunity, and with that, quite an excellent opportunity for increasing access to an IB education and engaging students in their interests. So that's on May 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US. IB's for everyone, we think. So, world-class education for every kid, and whatever that looks like, whether or not it's taking 1 or 2 courses, being a full diploma candidate, or even having access to the career-related program. We believe in the teaching and learning and the approaches that prepare students for not just college, but for whatever is next for them in the years to come, to be confident, lifelong learners. And with that, we would like to see, Zach, if there are any questions for either Kelsey or myself.
Yeah, we have one question here. So given that the full DP is rigorous, how would you recommend talking about rigor without sort of turning kids off?
I could start, Kelsey, because I always think of rigor personally. Things that I find challenging in my context might not be challenging for others, and I think that's the beautiful thing about the way we're collaborating now, whether it's online, and hopefully, we'll be back together again soon. But it's bringing all of those different pieces together. We have to acknowledge that I might be stronger at something than others in the team, and then there are other people in the team that do things and see things in a way and bring their experiences to solving problems in ways that I haven't. So making it personal in that way and talking about rigor in from a growth mindset approach. And there's lots of really fantastic resources on how to implement or how to think in terms of a growth mindset, can help to maybe demystify or to reduce the anxiety around rigor, and think about it as, I should challenge myself. That's the only way we're going to grow. We do that if we're doing that physically in our fitness. To do that in our learning is obviously going to help us to be more prepared and to be more successful. And so, knowing that wherever you come to the learning experience, it should be challenging, even if you're the most academically, successful student, getting top marks. You should still be challenging yourself. But for every student, I think just demystifying this idea that rigor is means it's too hard, or it's out of my comfort zone, or it's too, it's going to be unapproachable. Anything to add, Kels?
Yeah, I agree with all that. Two things. One, I think really being explicit with all of your teachers first about, just because you're a DP teacher doesn't mean you give 2 hours of homework just to give 2 hours of homework, right? We want to focus on quality of the work and over quantity of the work and the depth, right? And making it very differentiated for students. So you're not overwhelming them with work that maybe is not necessarily going to help them in that moment. And that's fine. And oftentimes teachers hold on to an activity that they've always done, but really helping them think through their curriculum and what they're asking students to do, so that it's not perceived as this insane amount of work, but instead it's very purposeful work. And so everything the students do feels very meaningful to them. And then on the side of the student, there's nothing wrong with rigor, I think. And you have to balance that with obviously giving them coping strategies, helping them through it, but also helping them understand that overall life is challenging, right? And rigorous. And if they can go through these challenges in high school prior to going out into the world on their own, this is a safe environment to know and to show themselves that they can do it and they can be successful. So then when they are out on their own, they're like, you know what? I've done this before. I can do it again. And that is really powerful.
Very much so. Do we have another question there, Zach?
I think we're all set here.
Awesome. Well, obviously, we have an incredible global team of IB World Schools managers that support schools in various parts of the world. Kelsey is one of them. Please let your manager know if you are in need of support when it comes to attracting students to the program. We also have a form that you can complete if you'd like to get in touch with me and talk through some of the individual strategies that you are facing, so that we can learn more about what you're doing and what you're struggling with, maybe point you to resources that we might have tucked away somewhere, or look at how we can develop the sorts of things that you need. So that form is available on the landing page adjacent to where you registered for the webinar today. And here is my contact information. But thank you, Kelsey, very, very much for your time and for sharing all of your insights. It's been great.
The schools highlighted in these presentations are the ones doing the very difficult heavy lifting, and it's amazing to see their commitment and inspiration every day. So thanks to all of those schools and school leaders.
And thank you for joining us. We know that there's a lot of webinars, there's a lot of things that you're doing online, and we're all a little fatigued in that regard. So we're really grateful that you were here today.